What are you most excited to read about early on in the Winds of Winter? Cersei and Margaery's trials in King's Landing versus the High Sparrow? Maybe Aegon taking Storm's End with the Golden Company? Or even the prologue, which George Martin has confirmed will feature Jeyne Westerling, perhaps giving us a glimpse at Edmure Tully's rescue on his way to house arrest in Casterly Rock. Whatever it may be, it's probably already happened. The Winds of Winter will begin back in time. Let me explain. George is no stranger to continuity kerfuffles between the ending of one book and the beginning of the next book. For A Dance with Dragons, he had to include this author's note at the beginning to explain how the first half of Dance, roughly, is happening alongside A Feast for Crows. The timeline doesn't start to move forward again until around Jaime's first chapter of Dance, which is the 48th out of 72 chapters total. For reference, that's Jaime's last chapter ever, where he goes off with Brienne into Lady Stoneheart's trap. Whatever happened there, whether they lived or died, must have already occurred by the time Dance is over, but we're not going to read about it until Winds. But even once we get to Jaime 1 and the timeline starts moving again, it's not exactly in order. The most blatant example of this is the epilogue, in which Varys the Spider vents out of the walls of the Red Keep to assassinate Pycelle and Kevan Lannister. You'd think, being the final chapter of Book 5, and perhaps the final chapter of A Song of Ice and Fire ever published, that it would be the most current, chronologically speaking. But since the small council gets the news of Connington's march on Storm's End, this chapter must occur shortly after the Griffin Reborn, where the Golden Company plans their march. That was the 61st chapter of Dance, compared to the epilogue 72nd. So my point is, a lot of the stuff we're waiting to see happen has already happened, and there's certain implications we can glean from this. Before I go any further, I use this massively impressive spreadsheet to help check my work and do research for this video. I'm sure even the creators won't claim it's 100% accurate, but I think it's really spot on and worth referencing. So thank you to these dedicated Ice and Fire fans on Reddit 13 years ago. Your work has been a tremendous help. Also thank you to my patrons. If you want early access to all my videos, your username displayed right here, and to support my channel, please join my Patreon for $5 if you want. Thank you. So if we accept the idea that A Dance with Dragons epilogue actually occurs over a month before the book really ends, this tells us that Cersei Lannister's trial has already happened. Kevan Lannister says the small council will reconvene in 5 days after Cersei's trial. That one's a trial by battle, with Sir Robert Strong as Cersei's champion. Margaery intends to be tried by the Faith, whatever that means. Well, as I've discussed in previous videos, we can be reasonably certain about both of their trials' outcomes already. Kevan explains in the epilogue why Cersei must win her trial. If my niece is proved guilty of these treasons, the legitimacy of her children will be called into question. If Tommen ceases to be a king, Margaery will cease to be a queen. A step further, we can say that if Tommen ceases to be a king, then his edict to rearm the Faith militant and raise up the High Sparrow, Cersei's doing obviously, but done in Tommen's name, then that means the High Sparrow benefited off an illegitimate king born of incest and adultery. Literally no one wants Cersei to lose her trial, except the Dornish perhaps, but Lady Nymeria won't make it to King's Landing in time to do anything about it. She's still on the road as of the epilogue. She could be in the city now, at the chronological end of Dance, but since the epilogue takes place weeks ago, she's still on the road, and Cersei's going to win her trial thanks to Sir Robert Strong, who is, in all likelihood, Qyburn's monster, the reanimated corpse of Gregor Clegane. How about Margaery's trial, probably occurring shortly after Cersei's? In the epilogue, Mace Tyrell refuses to leave King's Landing with his army and go confront Aegon Targaryen and the Golden Company until Margaery's trial is over. But now I have to pause and discuss how the Red Keep will react to Kevan and Pycelle's murders. Varys admits that he killed them in order to keep Cersei in charge of Tommen. Not because Varys loves Cersei, but because he needs chaos in the city, chaos that Aegon can come rescue them from. These murders will make Mace Tyrell look guilty, since Pycelle would certainly say anything against Margaery, like providing her moon tea, and Kevan is still Cersei's uncle and prioritizes House Lannister above anything. And more importantly, the removal of Kevan means that Tommen needs a new regent. Mace Tyrell is already Hand of the King and could probably just name himself King's Regent as well, making him the most powerful man in Westeros. Cersei would fight back, believing Mace had her lackey and her uncle killed. But the only weapons Cersei has are Qyburn and Robert Strong, and we know she doesn't have Mace Tyrell killed by Robert Strong thanks to a Winds of Winter preview chapter, Arianne 2, in which we're told that Aegon and Jonqon have successfully taken Storm's End, and that Mace Tyrell's army is descending upon them from King's Landing. The aforementioned timeline places the Winds of Winter Arianne 2 about a week after the dance epilogue, which means Mace Tyrell must be assured of Margaery's safety if he's willing to march south, and it means that if Margaery's trial even happened, she won easily. I say her trial might not happen because Mace wants to cancel it in the epilogue, imploring Kevan to simply make Tommen decree Margaery's innocence. Kevan refuses because it would make Margaery look guilty even if she isn't. But Kevan doesn't seem to think that the idea is impossible, meaning that if Mace Tyrell assumes the regency after Kevan's murder, he can have Tommen decree Margaery's innocence and avoid a trial altogether. But even if a trial does happen, the case against Margaery is very weak. The High Sparrow knows it, Osney Kettleblack recanted his accusations, the whole thing is a sham. So the government of King's Landing by early Winds of Winter will look something like this probably. Tommen is king, Margaery is queen, Myrcella comes back with Nymeria to be Tommen's heir, Cersei is probably just queen mother, and Mace Tyrell is Hand of the King and King's regent. Randyll Tarly and Paxter Redwine are the Master of Law and Master of Ships, respectively, 2 Tyrell bannermen. Cersei is brutally alone and outnumbered with the deaths of Pycelle and Kevan, and Jaime's refusal to answer her call for help. The Tyrells have a political advantage. When people discuss the beginning of Winds, they mention 3 big battles that George might have cut from A Dance with Dragons and has had written for years. The Battle of Ice between Stannis and the Boltons, the Battle of Fire between Barristan and the Slavers, and whatever the hell Euron's about to do in Old Town. I've discussed those 3 battles a lot, most prominently in my Chaos in Westeros series, but I think we're underestimating just how critical the clash between Tyrell and Targaryen will be to the plot of southern Westeros. The Tyrells have an army essentially untouched by either Robert's Rebellion or the War of the Five Kings, and they hail from the breadbasket of Westeros. I don't believe we're given a specific number, but I have to imagine between Tarly and Tyrell, the Reach has at least 20, but probably closer to 40,000 men at the ready. The logistics of maneuvering and feeding an army that size, having been raised this long, hurts my brain, so I think George just wants us to handwave it and suspend our disbelief. In that Arianne preview chapter from Winds, Daemon Sand points out that Aegon and Jonqon only have 10,000 men. But Arianne says, Lord Connington knows his own strength, surely. If he means to risk battle, he must believe that he can win it. Now here's something. With Kevan gone, and Mace Tyrell the top dog in King's Landing, I don't think there's any reason for him personally to go battle the Golden Company. He'll want to stay at court with Margaery and Tommen, keeping an eye on Cersei, establishing his own rule now that Kevan's dead. So he'll send Randyll Tarly at the head of his army instead. This theory now branches off into 2 new ones. First, Cersei will be hit with her new, powerless reality. She won't even be able to influence Tommen as much as Margaery and Mace can. So, lunatic as she is, Cersei will play her only card, Robert Strong. Thus, Mace Tyrell is assassinated very early in Winds, probably like right now or a few days ago, chronologically speaking. And the news will reach Randyll Tarly just before the battle. And for my second additional theory, now Randyll Tarly has a choice. He can stay loyal to House Tyrell and carry out this battle as planned, or he can switch camps and join his huge army to Aegon's. I think this will happen for several reasons. 1. The only reason Mace was still protecting the Baratheon Lannister royal family was because he married his daughter into it. Randyll Tarly has no blood connection to the Iron Throne. 2. There is reason to believe George is setting up a Tarly betrayal. Kevin Lannister thinks of Randyll Tarly as the real threat in the Reach. We know that Mace Tyrell enjoys the glory for Randyll Tarly's military accomplishments, and Tarly may also resent how he had a claim on Brightwater Keep through his wife, Melissa Florent, but Mace Tyrell gave it to his second son, Garland Tyrell, instead. And that's not to mention the fact that House Tarly are, historically, Targaryen loyalists. Even though Lord Randyll doubts legitimacy of both Jon Connington and Aegon, he could be convinced. The final reason I think Tarly will defect is because that quote from Daemon Sand is right. 10,000 men is not a lot. If Aegon's going to do anything in the Winds of Winter, he needs a larger army. And it just so happens that Randyll Tarly and Aegon Targaryen will have a common enemy, Euron Greyjoy. Tarly agrees to join his strength to Aegon's on the condition that Aegon marches west to remove Iron King Euron from the Reach. And Aegon will agree not only for the sake of wanting a larger army and more alliances, but he'll want to prove himself to the realm as blood of Aegon the Conqueror, to win a war, shower himself in glory, and convince Westeros to take him seriously. He can even stop in Old Town and be crowned by the High Septon, the same way Aegon the Conqueror was. For the record though, I don't think Randyll Tarly is going to curb stomp the Ironborn, then help Aegon take the Iron Throne, and then rule on his small council and make Aegon name him the Warden of the West, or whatever. I think the fight against Euron is a perfect time for Randyll to get humbled. And I hope Sam gets to watch Euron feed his father to a kraken in Old Town. Oh, and by the way, Cersei might not stop at Mace. She could assassinate Margaery Tyrell as well. Which would be tragic, and Margaery doesn't deserve it, but I think these two quotes work very nicely as foreshadowing her death as a virgin. Despite rumors of promiscuity, Margaery really was a maid, doing what her father told her, doing all that was ever asked of her, and even she isn't safe from the Game of Thrones. I have gotten a little ahead of myself here, even though the Queen's trials have probably already happened, and the so-called Battle of Steel is going to happen in about 5 minutes. But we can go back even further in time to stuff we'll read about first, the prologue of the Winds of Winter. First off, 2 things. George has already confirmed that Robb Stark's widow, Jeyne Westerling, will appear in the prologue, but isn't necessarily the POV character. And we know that George gets funky with his prologues and epilogues time-wise. For example, the Pate prologue of A Feast for Crows takes place before the ending of A Storm of Swords, since Tyrion kills his dad at the end of Storm, and Tywin is still alive in the Feast prologue. News of that caliber travels fast, especially to an information hub like Old Town, where thousands of people are arriving every day from someplace else. All that to say, I think the Winds of Winter prologue actually happens somewhere near the middle of A Dance with Dragons. Allow me to expound. Jeyne Westerling is being escorted back home to the Crag by Sir Forley Prester and a bunch of Lannister men, whose main task is getting Edmure Tully to Casterly Rock, where he'll be treated real nicely under house arrest. Jaime watches Edmure and Jeyne leave Riverrun in his 7th and final chapter of Feast. He only has 1 chapter in Dance, the one where he's at Raventree Hall and he disappears with Brienne. Even though that chapter takes place in the middle of Book 5, remember that the front half of Book 5 is happening concurrently with Book 4, so A Dance with Dragons Jaime 1 occurs only a few days after A Feast for Crows Jaime 7. We don't know what happened to this prisoner party. Jaime and Brienne were our only POVs in the Riverlands, and now both of them are getting into shenanigans with Lady Stoneheart and the Brotherhood. Cersei's been imprisoned and atoned and whatnot, so if anything happened with that prisoner party, she hasn't been told yet. And neither has Kevin by the epilogue, which you'll recall takes place well before the current point of the story. The timeline I've been referencing places Edmure and Jeyne's departure around May 20th, and the epilogue around June 28th. I think it's perfectly reasonable that none of our relevant POV characters would have had news of a potential prison break in only a few weeks' time. So if Edmure got freed, he could currently be anywhere. But first, who frees him? His uncle, Brynden Blackfish? Some members of the Brotherhood, acting on Lady Stoneheart's order to save her brother and her daughter-in-law? Or maybe both? Maybe Nymeria's pack of wolves attacks the traveling party, via Arya dreamwarging all the way from Braavos to set her uncle free. I won't pretend to know who actually would save Edmure if Edmure is getting saved, but those are some options at least. Lady Stoneheart in particular is interesting, since we know she still carries around Robb's Crown of Winter. This is probably just a style choice by George, a permanent symbol of Stoneheart's mission, revenge for the Red Wedding, revenge for her son. But if the crown itself does matter, perhaps Lady Stoneheart believes Jeyne is pregnant with Robb's child, who would one day need to don this crown. Robb last saw Jeyne in A Storm of Swords Catelyn 5, when he leaves her at Riverrun. We last saw Jeyne in A Feast for Crows Jaime 7. The timeline estimates this as May 20th, and Robb departing Jeyne as November 15th the prior year. So if Robb got Jeyne pregnant before he left for the twins, she'd be around 6 months pregnant in that Jaime chapter, but he doesn't notice a baby bump. And Jeyne's mother also says she's been giving Jeyne moon tea, and we don't really have any reason to think she's lying. The Westerlings are Lannister bannermen who live in the Westerlands, and they reluctantly went along with Jeyne's marriage to Robb because they had already fornicated each other. So I guess I'm disproving this theory, but I'm also willing to hold space for it. Jaime didn't exactly take a long look at Jeyne, and if she wore a baggy dress and never did have that moon tea, she could be pregnant. And Lady Stoneheart could somehow know that and could want to protect the baby, the heir to the north. But also, Lady Stoneheart could want to assault this party just to save Edmure, disregarding Jeyne Westerling. He's her brother after all. Or, here's an even darker theory. The Brotherhood has a man inside Riverrun now, Thomas Evans. Maybe Tom reported that Edmure took a deal with the Lannisters, that Edmure told Blackfish to surrender the castle and is now headed to Casterly Rock to be a well-kept hostage. George set up a little rivalry between Edmure and Tom, as Tom once fornicated a woman Edmure was supposed to lose his virginity to. Since Edmure had alcohol-induced erectile dysfunction that night, Tom made a song about a floppy fish. So it would be full circle, I guess, for Tom to stay involved with the Edmure plot all this time later. We, the reader, know that Edmure surrendered Riverrun to save his child, since Jaime threatened to launch him or her with a trebuchet. But Lady Stoneheart isn't exactly a rational human at this point, and I could see wanting to make Edmure answer for his crime. Could Edmure join his pal Jaime on the hanging tree? George might have set this up too. In A Feast for Crows, Jaime mentions not wanting to have to capture Edmure for a third time. Once very early in the War of the Five Kings, all the way back in Book 1, then again at the Red Wedding, and now they'll see each other again, not as each other's captive, but both captives of Lady Stoneheart. The Jaime and Brienne plot is really difficult to predict. I've got no clue how Jaime will wiggle himself free of that one. I do think Jaime and Brienne both need to survive in order to fulfill Jaime's Weirwood Stump dream, in which he sees himself and Brienne fighting side by side against the darkness. In the dream, that darkness was the bowels of Casterly Rock and the ghost of Kingsguard Past. But in the future, that darkness will be the Long Night and the others. So one option that I really like is that the Brotherhood attacks Foley Prester's party, takes Edmure to hang alongside Jaime, and Brienne and Britain Blackfish must intervene. Blackfish is a Tully through and through, and he won't stand by as one Tully slays another. So maybe Blackfish is able to convince Stoneheart to use Edmure and Jaime to infiltrate Riverrun, where, mind you, Thomas Evans is an inside man, to massacre the wedding between Davin Lannister and a Frey girl. Lots of readers believe this Red Wedding 2.0 will occur in the Winds of Winter, and while I can't see Jaime raising his sword against Davin or Jenna, this could be how he escapes. Another option I like is a bit more tinfoily. Before Stoneheart can execute Jaime and Edmure, the Brotherhood will be beset by Nymeria's pack of wolves. Arya, through Nymeria's eyes, will stop her mother from killing her own brother, and will give Lady Stoneheart the gift of mercy. This is another popular theory, that somehow Arya will be the one who kills Lady Stoneheart, after seeing how tormented her mother's become. After all, it was Arya, again while warging Nymeria, who pulled Catelyn's corpse from the river and allowed her to get resurrected in the first place. Now, it will be Arya who sets her free. Not literally Arya, since she's 11 and still in Braavos and probably won't be back in Westeros by this time, but Arya through Nymeria. And as recently as A Feast for Crows Jaime 7, George sprinkled the existence of Nymeria's wolfpack in Jaime's brain, perhaps a little clue that Nymeria will appear again in a future Jaime chapter. And if you'll allow my fanfiction to continue, I've always thought a fitting path forward for Jaime is leading the Brotherhood without banners, forgetting about southern politics for good and leading the Brotherhood, Brienne, and Nymeria's wolfpack to the north. If Jeyne Westerling is pregnant, their mission could be to bring her to Winterfell and install her child. If Arya does make it to Westeros in time, their mission could be to fulfill their oath to Catelyn by protecting Arya and trying to install her in Winterfell. Lots of possibilities, but as long as it ends with Jaime and Brienne fighting together in the Long Night, I think anything could work. Jaime's got a long way to go before coming anywhere near redemption, especially since his arc in A Feast for Crows was about trying to prove he could be just as ruthless as Tywin, and about being bitter and angry over Cersei cheating on him. But if Jaime's got any heroism left inside him, he can showcase that during the Long Night. He'll still be a pretty awful person, but a pretty awful person who saved 1 million people from getting burned by an insane guy, and then helped save the entire world from a race of misanthropic ice people, is better than just being awful, is my point. Grayness, George's favorite color. So if I'm right that events like Cersei's and Margaery's trials in King's Landing, the confrontation between Aegon and the Tyrell army at Storm's End, and Edmure's potential escape from his prison chain gang will all be happening very early in the Winds of Winter, and have already happened in-universe by the end of A Dance with Dragons, what does that mean for the loose plot threads from the actual end of Dance? Even though it was only the third to last chapter of Dance, Jon's assassination and the Pink Letter is the most recent major event to occur in the story. It happens after the Battle of Ice between Stannis and Bolton, something we won't see firsthand until Asha's first couple chapters in The Winds of Winter. The asynchronicity here is probably just because George Martin wanted to end A Dance with Dragons with a bang, and there's no bigger bang than Jon Snow being daggered to death. That means George didn't consider the Battle of Ice itself to be a big enough cliffhanger to end Dance with, probably because no major characters will die in the battle. Stannis will win, or at least prolong his war effort, because we know he needs to stay alive long enough to burn Shireen. This also means that if Stannis wins the Battle of Ice, his desperation that results in murdering his own daughter comes from someplace else instead of needing R'hllor to grant him victory against the Boltons. In my opinion, Stannis will oust the Boltons, but still feel the need to sacrifice Shireen once the others start knocking on the door. According to Tormund, the others followed his wildlings all the way south to the Wall. Stannis will be desperate to wake a stone dragon to fulfill his role in the new Long Night as Azor Ahai Reborn. But Jon Snow is the dragon, Rhaegar Targaryen's son, who will awaken from stone, Shireen's grayscale face. For a more detailed explanation, you can watch my Stannis Theory of Everything video. Similar to the Jon plot, I don't think Dany's plot will move forward until closer to the middle of Winds, since her last chapter in Dance, where she stalks that Dothraki scout, who will, presumably, lead her to get revenge against Khal Mago, that happens just before, or basically the same time as Jon's death. In that final Dany chapter, while she's sick and wandering the Dothraki Sea, she hears a wolf howling, and it makes her feel sad and lonely. In my academic opinion, the wolf howling comes the exact moment Jon was killed. Dany is hearing the cry of her soulmate despite the fact neither of them know each other exists yet. Because George is ultimately a romantic, and this whole story is leading to Jon and Dany's union. George makes her feel sad when the wolf howls because she doesn't want Jon to die, lonely because she wants a family, and hungry because she wants to devour Jon, sexually speaking. My hope is that Dany's sojourn with the Dothraki in Winds will be brief. She is going back in order to go forward, and once she fulfills her promise to kill Mago and Jaqo as justice for what they did to Arroway, she will prove herself the Khal of Khals, Drogon the stallion who mounts the world, and she'll get the remaining Khalasars on her side. Once that's accomplished, the rest of her marine arc can conclude swiftly since Dany has decided, as of this final chapter, to use fire and blood against the Masters, instead of subduing them with politics, which was failing. That was kinda the main lesson of both Jon's and Dany's plots in Dance. How difficult it can be as a young person in charge of tons of people who hate you. Jon makes the mistake of poor communication and underestimating just how much folks hate the wildlings and hate breaking vows. And Dany makes the mistake of thinking politics and alliances and reason can actually change a slaving society. Jon will be resurrected a changed man, like how Daenerys is now a changed woman. More ruthless, but just as righteous as they ever were. Now they have the strength to do what they know is right, no matter who opposes them. For Dany, that means killing any slave masters who get in her way, perhaps redistributing their wealth into social programs to help get the former slaves back on their feet, and then inspire a chain reaction of slave revolts across Essos, since we know the slaves outnumber the masters significantly. They're just waiting for Daenerys. For Jon, that means pummeling the Boltons and the Black Brothers who betrayed him, and organizing the defense of the North with Tormund and the Wildlings in preparation of the Long Night. And you might throw tomatoes at me for this, but it could also mean that Jon will take Winterfell for himself instead of handing it over to Bran or Rickon or Sansa or whichever Stark gets there first. George has been setting this up extensively, so the breadcrumbs are there if this is a path for Jon he chooses. Jon has recurring dreams of going down into the Winterfell crypts where the Stone Kings tell him he doesn't belong, but something compels him to go down there. Jon outright thinks about how much he wants Winterfell, how he's always wanted it, he can literally taste it. Jon refuses Stannis' offer again and again, and I don't think George will put him in a position to become Lord of Winterfell again and still have Jon refuse it. Anyways, that's enough theorizing about stuff. My point is just that these Jon and Dany plots won't get a little motion until after all the stuff I talked about before happens. Let me know down in the comments how you think the trials of the queens will go, and if you think the Reach could join forces with Aegon Targaryen. Will Edmure get freed by the Blackfish or the Brotherhood, only to get captured by Stoneheart right away? Thanks for watching and subscribing.